Today on The Deal, Carolyn Tisch Blodgett. She is a fascinating figure, Alex, right at the white-hot center of sports ownership. Her family has co-owned the New York Giants for about 30 years. She is now the lead owner of Gotham FC. That's the NWSL franchise here in the New York, New Jersey area. They have been wildly successful, and she is very successful.
Yeah, she has a great background. I mean, she was global head of marketing at Peloton, where she helped grow that market cap to over $30 billion. And I actually think the set of skills that she used there are going to really impact the way she runs Gotham today.
Knows a lot about growing businesses and growing them fast. All right, here's Carolyn Tisch Blodgett. So please introduce yourself.
I'm Carolyn Tisch Blodgett, CEO and founder of Next3, governor of Gotham FC, and strategic advisor to the Tisch family at the Giants.
So Carolyn, your signature deal, I think it's buying Gotham FC. Would you agree? And tell us about the decision to do that. We're jumping right in.
We are jumping right in. Exactly. I thought we were at a little warm-up. No, we are jumping right in.
We're jumping right in.
Okay. Well, I am going to take us back for a minute to put the Gotham deal in perspective, although I agree it has been our signature deal so far. So my background's in operating. I ran marketing at Peloton for 4 years. My family has co-owned the New York Giants for the last 30-some-odd years. And so I started working with my family a few years ago at the Giants. And the idea was really to bring a lot of the innovative thinking that I learned from Peloton and bring it to a legacy organization like the Giants. And I realized pretty quickly that, obviously not news to either of you, that sports was changing. And we as legacy owners had an opportunity either to kind of lean back and continue to watch it, or we could lean in and really help drive some of that innovation. And so I brought this idea to my family of starting a sports investment firm. It's now called Next3. To your question on, is Gotham the signature of it? I would say I started Next3 really with the agenda only being what do we think sports will look like in the next 30 years? We've been in sports for 30 years. What will the next 30 look like? There was not a thesis around, I often now get questions around women's sports and, did you start this because you played soccer growing up or, you have a passion for women's sports? And obviously I now do, but it was really just meant to be, what do we think sports will look like in the future? And there was just sign after sign that pointed to the growth of women's sports, and in particular, the growth of the NWSL.
What was that moment like where you decided to make the investment and then essentially you got it, like you're in charge? Tell us about sort of what it felt like in that moment and what you were thinking.
Yeah, so, deals always take longer than you think they're going to. So we had actually planned to announce around the World Cup. We had planned to announce when we were going into the playoffs. There were kind of all these moments, and then the deal didn't get finished. It didn't get finished. So it ends up closing on a Tuesday, or we announce it on a Tuesday. We wire the check on Wednesday. On Thursday, I get on a plane to fly out. They were in the championship in San Diego on Thursday. I get off the plane. I'm like still wearing my glasses, can like barely see. I like wear my one Gotham sweatshirt I have. And we land and I get to the team hotel and the media person pulls me aside and she's like, great, now you're going to address the team. And I was like, wait,
wow.
Me? And they're like, yeah, the team's having lunch, stand up and tell them why you're here. And I was so nervous. I was so intimidated. Like I'm looking at this room full of people that are on, 2 days away from playing in a championship game, completely intimidated. And God knows what I said. But many of the players came up to me after and they all said, thank you for being here. Mm-hmm. And it was this moment where I realized we had so many months to prepare for this moment, and it's going to be so different than we thought it is. This is not, an investment in an ad tech company. This is not even Peloton, which I did feel like I personally threw myself into. This was so personal. And I know that, most of what we're going to talk about today is probably on, how we look at it as an investment. But I think that was the first moment that it was so clear to me that even just showing up and showing our commitment and the idea that an NFL legacy family would make their first ever next investment in a sports team, in a women's soccer team, that really said a lot.
So walk us through how that opportunity comes. Obviously, you guys have great relationships in the investment bank community. Does a banker just call you and say, hey, Carolyn, there's an opportunity? Walk us through that.
Yeah, so it actually came about. There were a bunch of other teams that had been raising money around the same time, and so we actually looked at one of the other teams first, and
the NWSL.
In the NWSL, yeah, and we looked at it, and it was the first time we didn't even go. When we started X3, it wasn't clear to me that we were going to invest in another team. That was not the idea. The idea was, again, more kind of supporting companies around what would make us better owners, at the Giants. And so we didn't even think about investing in a team, but this deal came across our desk and we started looking at it. And then we started getting into we realized quickly, wow, there's a lot of exciting momentum in women's sports. They're sort of on the cusp of really, if a few things could go differently, like this league could really be onto something. So we started kind of going down the path of looking at the league, and we ended up actually looking at a few different teams in the league. Then we put our New York hat on and said, wait a second, we are legacy New York owners. There's a great story in our family that people often say when my grandfather ended up buying 50% of the Giants, he actually had an opportunity to buy 100% of a few other teams, which would have been a much less complicated deal. And he always said, I'm a poor kid from Brooklyn. To be able to buy 50% of the New York Giants, I would take that any day over 100% of, any other team.
Wow, great vision.
So that was really in my head. And so we said, what if we could come in with the New York team with Gotham. And so I approached the governor's wife, Tammy Murphy, who was the governor at the time. I will never forget.
Phil Murphy, the New Jersey governor, and Tammy Murphy, his wife.
Yeah, sorry, I should have cleared that up. Yeah, so the Murphys started Gotham. They are the original founders, and they are our partners. And so I went out to New Jersey and told them why we should be their partners.
Wow.
It's very intimidating.
Yeah. What did they say?
And what was your pitch?
Good question. So I talked about, our legacy as Giants co-owners, but then I mostly actually talked about Peloton. And I talked about my experience there and how I felt like this team was on the precipice of being great, but it needed, stronger marketing support and stronger, needed to be more a part of culture. And that was something that I could uniquely bring. And Tammy's incredible. She gets more done in a day than any human being.
Former Goldman Sachs banker,
yes,
I believe,
exactly,
right?
Yeah. Yeah. And she just, she cuts to the chase. This seems like it could work. Brought me over to Phil. We talked to Phil, and that started the conversations.
What was the pitch back to your family? What was that process?
Yeah, was this a Thanksgiving dinner? How do you?
No, just to be clear, I made sure my family was okay with it before I went to the Murphys and asked for that. So the pitch to them, I would say the three kind of markers that showed us that this could be an interesting investment were, the first was around this lack of visibility. Historically, women's soccer, even if it's always been a core women's soccer fan base, small but strong, but you couldn't find it on TV. So you were never, even if you were a really strong fan, you could either show up to a game in person if you lived in that market, or sometimes I think they were on Lifetime in the past, not exactly like where you're finding your average casual sports fan. So there was no opportunity for casual sports fans to come in. So we knew that the NWSL, through our research, was about to sign a new media deal. We didn't know what it was going to look like, but we knew, okay, what that new media deal will probably open the door to more casual fans. The second piece was around a lack of investment in women's sports. As you know, 99% of investments historically in sports have gone to the men's game. At this point, because we had looked at a few other teams, we knew that was starting to change. Legacy owners in other leagues were starting to come into this league. There was starting to be, it was starting to be better capitalized. And then the last piece, which was a bit more of a risk at the time and now seems kind of laughable looking back, was this kind of lack of being in culture. So for a long time, women's sports were just not a part of culture. It was not something people talked about. And now, again, a year later, I feel like all anyone talks about is Caitlin Clark, and the Everyone Watches Women's Sports shirt is like the hot shirt to be wearing around New York now. So obviously that's changed, but that was another one where we said, okay, is this something that could change in the future in a world where we're in an athlete-driven world and there's star power and there's all these great players within the league? Could that translate into growth in teams? And so those were the three vectors that we looked at the deal at. And I brought that to my family. And I have to say, they, again, didn't wake up thinking I wonder if we'll buy a women's soccer team one day, but they were incredibly supportive from day one.
So let's talk a little bit about the market of New York. There's a gift and a curse. I was fortunate enough in 2009 to be part of a World Championship team with the Yankees, and you've experienced over the last 30 years multiple titles, and you've tasted the glory of being a champion. However, there's 10 or 11 other teams here. How do you think about cutting through the noise of winning a title and not being in the front pages like the Giants or the Yankees?
Yeah, I think the way you said it is exactly right. It's a gift and a curse. So in some ways, it's the number one media market, the incredible fandom here, but it's really crowded, as you said. So again, 2 days into our ownership, we win the championship. I'm flying back with my family, and I'm like, I get so excited to read about it in the newspaper. Like everyone in the world must be talking about the fact that Gotham just won. And we open the sports pages and we're like, okay, it's not on the cover. Understandable. Fine. Women's sports is still growing. And we're like, okay, it's not on page 2. Okay, it's not on page 3. And we keep going and going. And there's literally not covered.
Wow.
And then we open our news feeds like on our phones. Is it on social media? No. And it's just no one was talking about it. And I think that really, crystallized that moment of, okay, we're not in culture right now, and that is on us to go build. So first of all, I should say that since then, the 2 winning sports teams in New York are the women's sports teams, right?
That's true.
And they obviously, very much are a part of culture here now. But that has been part of the work we've done in the last year, is building those relationships with the local newspapers, with people that kind of build New York culture. We had our players drop the ball at Times Square. We had a big media event. I can't remember if you were there.
I was at the Rainbow Room.
At the Rainbow Room when we introduced our free agents. So we have been kind of brick by brick building our story in New York, because as hard as it is to break into the New York sports scene, once you're in, there's nowhere better to win a championship than New York.
And let's talk about that, because you mentioned the Liberty, which win the 24 finals. Sorry, too soon.
Right, I guess I shouldn't have said that. Sorry.
No, I mean,
Thank you, Jason.
Respect. Amazing series, went the distance. And but one of the things that I think was very notable, and Alex and I have talked a lot about this, is how well curated the courtside seats are. I went to your first ever playoff game. You go through that suite, there's Eli Manning, there's Justin Tuck, there's Rich Kleiman, there's Megan Rapinoe, Sue Bird, all of these luminaries. It is in the culture. It feels like it's suddenly in the culture. So what happened? I mean, Caitlin Clark notwithstanding for the WNBA, there's something bigger going on. How do you respond to that? But also, how do you help create it?
I'm so glad you brought that up, because that was very deliberate. We really studied, I think in the past year, when I've thought about, who do we bring in to help run this team on the business side, it's been a real mix of in and out of sports. And part of why we did that is because we didn't want to just say, like, what is the typical NWSL playbook and let's go run it back. We wanted to look across all of sports, outside of sports, like who does it well in culture more broadly. And so the person who now runs marketing for us, she looked very closely at what does courtside at the Knicks look like? What does it mean when you go to a Yankees or a Yankees World Series game? Who's there? What types of people are there? What is the fan experience like? And so it's been a very deliberate build. So part of it is just having the vision to do it. The other part is the execution. And the reason I think we've been able to execute it well is because it all starts with having the best product on the field. And kind of putting my marketing hat on, you can't market a bad product. Like, you have to have the right product first. And we knew we had that. We have some of the best players in the world. We had all these Olympians that are, on our team at Gotham. So we know we have a great product. Now the job was to go build a great fan experience around that product. So it wasn't just 90 minutes of soccer. It was, the hour before at FanFest. It was who was in the suite, as you said. And so that was kind of the second part, was like building that great experience so that when people come, whether it's your average fan who plays local soccer or it's Eli Manning or Sue Bird, that you want to be there and you want to tell all your friends about it and you want to come back.
And so let's talk a bit about the Giants if we can. It's probably worth about $7 billion. If you look at the estimates, Gotham, maybe less than $100 million. they would seem incompatible from a scale perspective. Clearly, there are learnings back and forth. You're spending time at both. What are the most obvious connections that you take back and forth? And what are some that, maybe we wouldn't think of?
Yeah, when you put it like that, they do sound pretty far apart. They don't feel like it in the day-to-day.
They don't, though. That's interesting. So it feels similar.
Well, I would say the challenges feel different, but maybe like my personal passion for both feels similar. Maybe we'll say that. So I would say that probably the most clear synergies are just the learning sharing going on between the two. So as we're building up the business staff at Gotham, for them to be able to call people at the Giants and say like, hey, how do you think about, selling sponsorships? How we're thinking about putting in like a new CRM system. How did you guys think about that? Even on the soccer side, our GM and I spoke to Aaron Wellman, who's the head of performance at the Giants, just about like, how do you put a medical staff together? So the idea that you can, at any point when you have a question, you can pick up the phone and have a resource there to call is really fantastic.
And they know that. They just know that that's available to them. You created that so that you say, do you need something at the Giants? I'll connect you. Like, how does that work in practice?
Yes. Yeah, that's a good question. Yes. So I created that from the beginning. And part of it, I think, was allowing the Gotham team to build the respect with the Giants organization so that they didn't feel like, oh, who's this person calling me? It's like they feel vested in it. And it's actually been amazing to see how many Giants employees have become Gotham fans. And every time I'm at the Giants offices for work, often people come running over to me and I think they're there to talk to me about something about the Giants and they really just want to talk about Gotham. So that's been
if they're happy, they're probably talking to you about Gotham.
Fair. Too soon, I think. But yes, you're probably right. So there is this sort of, great synergies, I would say, kind of behind the scenes on the business side. The things that I think that I hadn't really, because to your point, the valuations are very different. The tenure, the Giants are celebrating their 100th anniversary. Gotham is, a couple years in, is the way that we think about fandom is so different, yet I think there's really great learnings across them. So for example, in the NFL, fandom is often generational. You're a Giants fan because your father was a Giants fan and your grandfather was a Giants fan and maybe there was a female fan in there, but it was probably your father and your grandfather. So it's very, it's passed down. It's very geographic. It's like you're a Giants fan because that's who you could watch on TV because you lived in New York or you used to live in New York. At Gotham, we're really building fandom from the ground up. Soccer is the number one sport played amongst youth in this country. So often parents are learning about soccer through their kids and their kids play soccer and then they don't actually, that doesn't, just because you play in your local soccer team doesn't necessarily translate to, and then I go watch my favorite soccer team on TV or I go to a game. And so that's what we're trying to do at Gotham is build that kind of ground up fandom. However, there's actually a lot to be, both teams could benefit from the other.
Yeah.
And so there are families where soccer is generational. So how do we bring that fandom to Gotham? And then at the Giants, figuring out how do you get a next generation of fans that may not have that in their blood. It might not be passed down, but needs to be built from the ground up. There's a lot of great lessons in there.
Talking about fandom, staying on that subject, over the last 30 years, your family have co-owned the Giants. And we understand very clearly how fans consume content. How do you think about it with your Peloton background the next 5, 10, even 30 years? How does that look and how different is it than the past 30?
Yeah, I think this is actually one of the things we were really excited about in our Gotham investment was the way that people are consuming sports is so different now. The avidity is still there, but it might not be that you sit and watch a whole 4-hour game. You're probably connecting through social media. You're probably connecting through athletes. There is this sort of athlete-driven, I don't need to tell you this, there's this, athlete-driven culture now. And so that, if you think about that from a Giants perspective, that is leaning into digital, that is leaning into into social. That's really sets us up well at Gotham. When I was at Peloton, that was one of the early insights we realized is people would walk around saying like, I love Peloton. And then when you ask them a follow-up question, it always gets to, I love Ally Love, or I love Robin. I can't end my day without Cody. And so we saw an opportunity to build the Peloton brand, but to build it via our stars, via our instructors. And that's very much something we're thinking about at Gotham is we want to continue to build love for the Gotham brand. One of the ways we can do that is to help tell the stories of our incredible players, both on and off the field, and take the love for Rose Lavelle and bring that to Gotham as well.
And so let's talk about Peloton, because it's clearly formative for you. And I would love to go back sort of to the beginning, because, you know, you go to Yale, then you go to Harvard Business School, you come out, you work for PepsiCo, you don't go into the family business. And then you go to what's then a relatively unknown startup called Peloton. Tell us about that decision, and what did you experience when you got there?
So I might just take us back for one moment, because I actually thought that I was going to go work at the Giants. I just had a baby and I left Pepsi, and I started doing a little consulting work for the Giants, and it was what I always thought I wanted to do. And it, for a variety of reasons, just didn't feel right at that moment. They were very focused on what was happening on the football side, and I was kind of bringing these like new innovative ideas, and it didn't feel right. And the reason I bring that up is because I probably would have never landed at Peloton had that experience not happened, because I had really built my entire career wanting to go work at the team. And then I got there and it didn't really work right. So then I was very open to sort of like, all right, I'll try anything, because I don't really know what my path looks like now. And so I go to Peloton, and I had always been sort of personally passionate about fitness, but didn't really see that as a career necessarily. And I had so many friends from business school in particular at the time being like, what are you doing? Why are you doing that? Or have you gotten crazy? Is this like an early midlife crisis? And the early days, I'd never worked at a startup. And so the early days, I came in under a brand marketing title, under a CMO who then left pretty quickly after I started. So then was given a much larger, set of responsibilities. And it was just a roll up your sleeves and figure it out as you go.
And the founder and CEO, John Foley, what was it in that first meeting? What did he say that you said, okay, I got to come work here?
So John, in the first meeting, he said, we're going to go build one of the best brands in the world. And I'm sitting there in this WeWork on 29th and Madison when no one had ever heard of them. And at the time it was, this was like this SoulCycle flywheel heyday. So Peloton was this like distant third. And I left and I called my husband and I was like, okay, he might be crazy, but he also might be right. And
I think it's a yes and.
It's a yes and. Yes, that's probably right. That's probably true.
And I love John Foley, and I would say yes and.
Yes and. Yeah, it's a little. Every founder's a little crazy.
Yeah.
People might say that about me too. So anyway, it just the opportunity to have that vision of we're literally in a startup where thousands of investors have told you no. We're selling. At that point we'd sold maybe 100 bikes. I mean, this was nothing. And he's sitting there saying, we're not just like, we're going to be a successful company, but we are going to be one of the most, I think he actually didn't just say best. He said one of the most important brands in the world. And I thought, wow, I don't know how we're going to do that, but I'd love to be a part of it.
So, Jace, I do have a quick follow-up on that, because I remember in the COVID days, the stock market cap went up to like 35 billion or so, plus or minus. Looking back in retrospect for our viewers, what is the lesson? What could John and your team have done to keep it at that level or keep it like a really strong business?
So I left in 2020. So I just mindful that I was not there in the in those moments. I was there in the peak and then not in the fall. I think one of the challenges I think for Peloton is there were always a lot of questions around what our TAM was. So what was our total addressable market? How big could this thing get? What COVID did was accelerate the growth so fast that I think it it questioned what that TAM was. And so there were people buying bikes that would have never thought about buying a bike before, but it was COVID, you couldn't leave, you couldn't go to the gym. And so I think one of the lessons was, being really thoughtful around what the sustainable TAM was. Like, we always knew at some point the pandemic would end. So like, what is the addressable market outside of a pandemic, and really anchor the business in that would be my lesson.
And so as you look back on you talked about sort of the star instructors, but there's also this moment of fast growth and, seizing the moment, as it were, which does lead to this question of sustainability for the growth of women's sports and women's soccer. How do you think about that? What worries you? Like, what are the things that could get in the way?
Yeah, we talk a lot at our team at Gotham now about sustainable growth and what does that look like. I think I go back to something I said earlier about like making sure you have the best product first, because the only way that a marketing funnel that is built on word of mouth works is when there's no leak in the bucket. Right? So like, if you think of a marketing funnel of like awareness, I find out about it, I consider it, I try it, and then ideally, which I think is what's happening with us at Gotham and happened with us at Peloton, is like, and then I love it so much, I'm going to come back and I'm going to tell all my friends. If people are churning at the bottom, if people come to a game, they buy a Peloton bike and they don't like it, they stop using it, so they stop paying. Or if people come to a Gotham game and don't have a good experience and don't come back, that whole model breaks down. And so when I think about sustainability, I think about ensuring that product is great first. And I don't just mean we're winning games, although obviously that helps. I mean, the fan experience, the way we show up, how people interact with our players on social media, and like, it's kind of the whole product, I would call it. That has to be right first for the rest of it to follow.
And I wonder if you think about this too, Alex, this notion of, you control your team and, when you have ultimate decision-making authority when it comes to that, you and your team. And yet you're also part of a collective group of people who are making decisions on behalf of the league. And, you've been a part of this, Alex, and obviously you're experiencing this now with the NWSL. What is that like to try and get everybody and to be an influential voice in a room of governors, which you are?
So that's been something that's been so interesting about this league. And I'd heard it coming in, and I very much seen it and feel it for myself too, is the owners around the table, many own other teams in other leagues as well, or have other big businesses. Many spend a disproportionate amount of their time on their NWSL team than they do on other things.
Interesting.
And kind of to your point on like the 7 billion versus the 100 million of like, yes, in theory, that would mean you shouldn't spend time on the 100 million, and I'd probably spend more time on that than anything else. So there's this feeling of, people are spending a disproportionate amount of time on it. The question is why? I think there's a general feeling of, we all see what this can be. We're all here for a reason. We all believe in what this league can look like. However, that is not going to happen by any of us leaning back. We all everybody needs to do their part. And whether that's, being on the commercial committee and pushing on that, whether it's on the sporting committee and thinking about how do you keep having a competitive product on the field, whatever those decisions are that you're kind of leading as a governor for the league are so critical, because we are quite literally creating the future of the league. The decisions we're making now are dictating what the future of the league is going to look like. So I think all of us feel this responsibility to really lean in and engage in the league and think about and make decisions that are not just right for our teams, but right for the entire group.
What's been something, as now a recent governor, that has surprised you on the good side, and some things that are a little bit more challenging than you even expected?
I think one thing that has really surprised me is this collaboration across owners. I think, ironically, now I'm kind of one of like the more tenured owners, even though I have been there for a year, because there's been so much ownership. But there's been this feeling, I think, from day one of, we will all win when the other teams win too. And so when Willow Bay came in Angel City a few months ago, I immediately reached out to her and said, like, here is my phone number. Call me anytime. I want to help you. I want Angel City to succeed because Gotham will succeed when Angel City's, just using them as an example, will succeed. And I had other owners do the same for me. And so there is this, collective feeling. We have all the CBOs spend a lot of time together, the chief business officers, and they'll, even on things like sponsorship, which in theory you're kind of competing with each other, they'll discuss the deal with each other because we know that if Bay is out there, not that they would be doing this, but like selling at a lower price than we're selling it, that hurts each other. And so we all are in this together. And so there's been this real kind of, we're all better when we're all helping each other feeling that surprised me. I thought of it as a more like, oh, we're competitors on the field, so we're competitors always. And it is very much not felt that way.
And so, sort of going back to the sort of synergies for a second between Gotham and the Giants. I mean, I wonder, as you're going through some of these decisions or decision-making processes at Gotham, I mean, are you calling your uncle and being like, hey, I'm running into this. Have you run into this over the past 30 years? Like, what are some inflection points that you think might be similar? Because NFL 30 years ago, it was big, but it wasn't anything like it is now.
Right. Yeah, I think there's been this very open, across. There's also a fair amount of NFL owners within the league as well. Mark Wilf and I both sit on the executive committee at the NWSL together. And what's actually interesting is that then there's also owners from NBA teams. So David Blitzer is also on the executive committees. Right. There's MLB owners with the Ricketts. So there's been this great ability, I think, for everyone to come with their individual, their like other league perspective, but also with a feeling of, we don't have to follow, like, let's go take the best of what everyone else does and also chart our own path. Yeah. And so there's this really, interesting shared learning happening where for any given question, it's, okay, well, Mark's going to tell you how it's done at the NFL and David's going to tell you how it's done at the NBA. But let's actually pause and think, do we want to do it any of those ways or do we want to do it differently? And that's been a really productive conversation.
And so your work with the Giants is interesting too. The day that Gotham hosted its first ever home playoff game, you were meant to be in Germany with the Giants because they were playing, I believe, their first international game. Is that right?
Oh, they played in London.
Okay,
first in Germany.
First in Germany, excuse me. You have been a huge proponent of that inside the Giants organization. Talk to us about that, especially as it feels like it illustrates part of what your role is within the Giants.
Yeah, that day gave new meaning to trying to be in two places at once. Did not work, but I had been in Germany and then I left to come home for the Gotham game. So yeah, one of the things that I've tried to bring to the Giants is, again, this sort of like, how do you build a modern brand perspective that I gained at Peloton. And so international is a big piece of that. Fandom in the NFL, again, has been generational, as I said, but it's also been very geographically defined. You were a Giants fan because you live in New York, and there's really only the Jets to compete with. Now, as you think about, you can be a fan from anywhere. If you're a fan because you're a fan of a player, if Patrick Mahomes is your favorite player, it doesn't matter that you don't live in Kansas City. You're a Kansas City Chiefs fan.
And may never go to a Kansas City Chiefs game.
And may never go to a game. That's a really important point, too. You could be the most dedicated fan on earth and never go to a game. So how do you build that relationship with fans that are never going to walk into your stadium? That's really different. And I do think, actually, there are a lot of lessons from Peloton in that. We had, in our early days of Peloton, everyone knew the instructors, personally. They would give them a hug after the game. The instructors were giving them shout outs in class. As we scaled, we had to professionalize it. Instructors were kind of cordoned off from the members. And so that kind of like the growing pains of that, changed over time. So anyway, back to the Giants being in Germany. So building a global brand, that is where the NFL is going. And how the Giants show up and do that, I think there are a lot of lessons from Peloton. There's a lot of lessons even from Gotham of how do you go build fandom when you don't have the geographic roots? Because we are in Germany, we are competing. Kansas City is a good example. They have the rights to Germany as well. We're as much competing with Kansas City as we are, in New York with the Jets.
Right.
What's interesting about the way that male and female consume content and get really excited about it. I find that some of my boys are only about wins and losses, right? They don't care about anything else, sports radio. And when I talk to my daughters about the Lynx or Gotham or any team, what gets them excited is the storytelling. And that's a way to connect. What ways are you thinking about from your players to connect to your fan base to help grow their brand?
Yeah, I think you bring up such a good point around storytelling and content. That is increasingly, I think we see for all of our fans that telling those stories, our players have such interesting stories to tell. I read something interesting recently around actually female athletes are so much better at storytelling than male athletes. So you do, again, back to the kind of the investment thesis around like, if we're in an athlete-driven world, we're in a content-driven world, you have female athletes, like you could, the writing's on the wall of where that could go. So content is a really big piece of it. And telling those stories, to your point, not just who they are on the field, but who they are off the field. We have one of our players is a cancer survivor. We need to tell that story. We have players who are incredibly into fashion, and they were at the front row of Fashion Week, so we need to tell that story. Rose Lavelle, one of our players, has this dog who is sort of like gone viral. The dog sort of has its like own personality on Instagram. So being able to tell those stories and really kind of explain who our players are in the rest of their lives is really key to our growth story.
So speaking of content, one of the interesting decisions the Giants made, and I know you're very involved in sort of the marketing side and the brand side, was Hard Knocks off season, which went viral in a lot of ways, really, truly behind the scenes on some very big decisions, including Saquon Barkley going to the Eagles. Talk about that strategy, how it works for the Giants, and then what you take away for something like Gotham.
Yeah, so that doing more kind of what I would call like off-helmet content is something that I've been really passionate about it and talking to the Giants about for a long time. If you look at shows like Drive to Survive, they were really the first to do it. It introduced a new audience into a sport that might have not been appealing for a lot of people. There are the number of people who texted me after Hard Knocks and said like, wow, I never thought I would ever watch the NFL before. And it's just a way to bring in a new audience, introduce the players, and introduce the brand in a really different way. And so that is something that I think the NFL will continue to do. And we absolutely look at it, Gotham as well, is, again, how do we tell those stories in a different way so that you bring in a casual fan? The NFL is always going to have their hardcore football fans, but there is a whole world of casual sports fans that you can bring in by doing this type of content.
Yeah, I think about, Midge Purse, who is, played for Gotham, was a guest on this show, and her show Off Season, was a completely different view of the NWSL and female soccer players, which I think literally had never happened to that point. There was not a show like that before. There was no model out there. So I do want to go back to this idea of what happens next for the NWSL, because we've talked a lot about the WNBA. We've had Candace Parker, Sue Bird on the show. The overnight sensation of the WNBA after 28 years. Everybody really coming on to it. NWSL is a little bit not as far along in its journey. A couple failed leagues, on the way here. Like, what is the next thing that has to happen, and what do you worry about?
So we talked, a lot about, starting with the product. I think that next step then is the fan. So how do you get fans to show up to games?
Yeah.
And I think about my time, again, kind of going back to my Peloton days, is we had to create a category. No one was sitting around thinking like, I wish I could go buy a bike that streamed my favorite spin class in my living room. We literally wrote the term connected fitness, which is now, a term.
Yeah.
Not that we are inventing women's soccer at Gotham or at the league. Obviously, that has existed for a long time. But we are this kind of the point of breaking into culture. We have to go create this category. We have to go create the demand for people to come. There are the core fans, but to break out and get and fill stadiums and sell out over and over, we have to go create that demand. So again, I go back to this idea of like, we have a great product. Now we have to go create a great fan experience around it in game. Then we have to think about the 365 days a year. How do we build that, fan fandom and that relationship with fans, I think consumers come first, and you're starting to see that. We had record-breaking attendance at our first ever playoff game. I know the Washington Spirit sold out. I think Kansas City has sold out all of their games this year. So you are starting to see the fandom there. That is kind of, I would say, step one and how we think about it at Gotham. I think then sponsorship and partnerships, like those come later. Typically, I think you do see brands kind of follow, like consumers always go first. But I would say in terms of like, what are the risks, what are the opportunities? I think that is like the next step to come in.
So the risk is people just stop showing up.
I don't. Well, yes. I mean, in theory, of course, there is. We look at a metric called Net Promoter Score. It's, again, a tech metric that we brought into women's soccer. And our NPS score, so NPS is measured 100 to negative 100. So a score of 0 is actually not that bad. Our scores are typically in the high 80s. That is an unbelievable score. Apple, I think, is like 60. I want to say Starbucks is in the 70s. These are really high numbers. So people when they come to the game, they want to come back. Yes, in theory, it could all fall apart and people could stop showing up.
Because you got to get them there.
We have to get them there. And I think that has been probably the biggest challenge from the beginning.
Yeah.
And why we've been so deliberate about, finding new ways to get people there. There's always been this debate within the league of like, do you do comps? Do you not do comps? I've been a big believer in comps because, again, if you go back to this.
Meaning complimentary tickets.
Giving out complimentary tickets.
Sorry to be so deliberate.
Yes, sorry. Complimentary tickets. Because it is not on people's radar on day one. So if you get them there and you kind of bring them into that marketing funnel, they will come back.
Mm-hmm. I do want to talk a little bit about what's next for Next 3. First of all, is Next 3 decades? Is that what what is it? Next 3 people? What is Next 3?
So Next 3, my husband actually came up with the name. When you play pickup basketball, which I don't frequently, but he does, I guess, or used to. When you win a game, then the person will say like, all right, next 3 up. And it's this idea of like, all right, you won. Now you're thinking about like, who are the next 3 you're playing?
Oh.
Like we're leaning into the future.
Very clever.
It is clever. I wish I could say it more concisely.
Talk to me a little bit about, some of your LPs. How do you think about pitching it, outside of your family? And also, how do you deal with being a control partner? And most funds have the burden, investment and exit. How do you, go through those challenges?
Yes. So I'm definitely am not an investor. I now sitting here today, I'm like, I wish I'd taken those classes in business school.
Right.
I did not. So it is just our family. So the LP, so it's my mom, Lori Tisch, her 2 brothers, John and Steve, who are the 3 owners of the Giants, and then everyone in my generation, all my cousins, my sister and my cousins. So I think we have the benefit of really running it more like a family office than a fund, which means, to your point, we're not necessarily thinking about the exit. We're not even, obviously we are returns driven, but we're not just returns driven. And I think that's been really important in how we've looked at investments, because every investment we look at, we ask ourselves the question, why are we on the cap table? Why are we the ones sitting here today? And if the answer is they just want capital, then we're not going to do the deal, because there are plenty of people that are better investors probably and have a larger team to invest than we do. The reason we're there often is because of my experience at Peloton and or our legacy co-ownership of the Giants, and now increasingly because of our role at Gotham. And so the reason I say all that is because we look at investments sometimes because we think it will make us better at the rest of our jobs. And so we've looked at investments that will potentially make us better NFL owners, will teach us about what one of our investments is this company called Transmit Live, which they help kind of run the back end of ad tech as sports move to streaming. They run a lot of the ad tech in advertising for streaming. Anyway, the reason I bring that up is I hope it does well, and it actually is doing very well. We also did that investment because sports will continue to move to streaming, and media deals are an increasingly important part of the valuations around owning teams. And so for us to get smart on what that looks like makes us better owners and makes us be able to have more intelligent conversations, sitting around boardrooms. So a lot of the deals we look at, we are there again for the returns, but we're also there because of what we're learning.
So Carolyn, staying on next three, what do you see in the future? I mean, can you see another team? Can you see yourself buying a stake of a WNBA team or anything else?
We are still actively looking at investments. I think the past year has been a bit of a heads down, like we got to get Gotham to where it needs to be. But I say to my team every day, we're very deliberately, we didn't start Next 3 to buy Gotham. And we started Next 3 because we want to be at the forefront of where sports is going. Women's sports and women's soccer is very much a part of that, but it's not the only place sports are going. So we are still actively looking at other things. I don't know what those will be yet, but we continue to believe that there is more happening in sports that we want to be a part of.
You know, obviously both of you have this shared experience of, getting into ownership. Has going into Gotham changed your personal visibility? Do you feel like you're sort of out there more? Because I don't know if I'm asking this well, but with the Giants, it's it's your family. But for Gotham, you're the face, you're the person on the Jumbotron when they cut to the owner's box to see the reaction. What's that been like for you?
Yeah, I don't think I realized that was going to be that. I think when we decided, I thought it was a good deal. I thought it was, a good thing for our family to be in. I don't think I realized how much it was it was going to be tied to my personal identity.
Yeah.
The number of messages I get from, old friends from college or business school that will just kind of randomly reach out to me and say, thank you for what you're doing for women's sports. And I now take that really seriously. And I didn't, again, we bought Gotham because we thought it was a good investment. I don't think I appreciated how much I now feel. I've always felt tremendous pressure. That's probably why I'm so type A, but I've always felt tremendous pressure since starting Next 3 to deliver the returns to my family, to make good investments. I now feel a tremendous pressure to help grow women's sports. And that's a different level of pressure, as I now feel this kind of societal pressure and cultural pressure to realize, I think we all are clear on what the dream is for women's sports. And I feel very responsible for the execution of that.
Yeah.
So it is a different, it was not what I thought would be.
All right. We're going to move to our rapid fire segment. This is fun. We're going to keep it tight. And we'll just bounce back and forth and, answer however you see fit. All right. What's one word to describe your deal making style?
Unconventional.
What's more important, your gut instinct or data?
Well, I'm the most indecisive person on earth, so I would say both.
Okay, perfect. What's your best piece of advice you've ever received on deal making or business?
Create a culture where you would want to work.
What's the worst advice you've ever been given?
That this was going to be easy.
What's your hype song before a big meeting or big negotiation?
I mostly only listen to my kids' Taylor Swift albums, so probably Taylor Swift version.
That's fair. Do you have a go-to Peloton instructor?
I did go on the Peloton today with Robin. Love Robin.
Robin Arzon.
If you can only watch one sport for the rest of your life, which one is it?
Oh, my kids always ask me football or soccer. It's so stressful. Probably football still.
What team do you want to see win a championship more than any? This is a tough one for you.
Gotham.
Do you have a fun fact about yourself that your colleagues would be surprised to hear?
I am a vegetarian because my sister used to moo at me at the table because she was a vegetarian and she bullied me into becoming one too.
That Perfect. Is amazing.
It's true. And here I am, still eating tofu 30 years later.
Well, this was really fun. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.